I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending June the 1st. We've been talking about this struggle between supply and demand, and we know we have big supplies coming with all these market-ready cattle that are hitting the market right now. But we weren't prepared for the type of demand that we are seeing, especially for export, but just huge export sales and good consumer demand domestically also. And it's just really helping things out here, trying to stave off the pressure from all these big supplies. But this week it looked like demand prevailed, and actually our fat cattle market was a little bit higher this week than it was on the meager trade that we had the previous week. Now let's look at the board for the week. Your August live cattle futures, of course Monday was a holiday, Memorial Day. Tuesday was down 85 cents. Wednesday was up $3 with news from the big export sales that we had the previous week. Thursday was off 50 cents. Friday was down 32 cents with August live cattle ending the week at 103.62. That was up $1.32 for the week. Your June spot live cattle market ended the week at 104.90, up a quarter for the week, and that's still a $5 basis, or a little better than that than what our cash market ended up. August feeder cattle, Monday was a holiday. Tuesday up a nickel. Wednesday, the feeder cattle got lent a bunch of support from the big export sales too, up $3.57 on Wednesday. Thursday down $1.15. Friday down $1.07. With your August feeder cattle ending the week at 146.32, and that was up $1.40 for the week. October ended the week at 146.43, and there's just not much difference. Actually, there's less than 30 cents difference in all your traded feeder cattle months for the rest of the year. So unless something happens with our feedstuffs, with our crops that are getting along really good right now, just not going to be a whole lot of difference in your feeder cattle for the near distant future. But up here in the Midwest this week, and had some work going on up here, and then eventually making my way up to the LMA convention next week in Dubuque, Iowa. But here in my old stomping grounds in northwest Missouri, and I tell you what, they had a really dry winter, didn't have much snow at all, didn't have any rain hardly at all, and had to sell a lot of cows off like a lot of places did in the Midwest, you know, in the spring, because they were just running out of pond water for them to drink, and very short supplies of hay. But in the last week or two, they've had some good rains up in this heart of the Midwest country. The corn looks fantastic. The beans have a good start to them. The pastures look good. They are putting up hay. Now the hay's not going to be a lot of tonnage. It's fairly short, but it's thick enough. And but the grazing is really good. Normally this time of year your grazing outruns your cattle, but they were able to get the cattle on there and kind of keep those pastures from getting too coarse and hard to eat. And still a lot of good tender grazing out there on the fescue pastures in this part of the country, and cattle really looking good and appear to be getting good gains off of them. But let's look at the fat cattle trade for this past week. Through Thursday, they'd sold 32,000 head, and we're starting to get back to a little bit more normalcy of the trade here. We're not seeing quite as much of an effort to sell those 2 to 4 week cattle out, because I don't know that the packers are going to be able to beat this market down a whole lot more. And your sellers are not afraid of the carpet coming out from under this market, really, so they're not in a big hurry to sell those cattle for out front. Our basis is going away, and we're starting to get down to kind of a normal type trade as we get into this spot June that's going to meet up fairly soon in the next week or two with what your cash market is. But we did have numbers this week that moved the bulk of the trade. In the southern plains in Kansas and Texas, it was $1.10. They sold all their fat cattle that way. And we did see some more trade on top of that 32,000 on Friday, with Nebraska and the northern plains selling $1.11 live. So that 110 to 111 live market would be steady to $1 higher than the previous week. Your dress sales in the northern plains, 177 to 178. That would also be a buck higher. And who would have thought that we would have got $1 higher for fat cattle right as we get into the glut of this big wall of cattle? But I tell you what, nobody saw the type of export demand and the big heavy change speeds, fast change speeds, slaughtering and harvesting a lot of cattle and really taking care of the supply problem for us. But you look at some of that news that we saw this week, your actual dressed steer weights dropped again 2 pounds lighter, and actually are about 3 pounds lighter than the 5-year average at 846 pounds. And that's for your actual slaughter information for the week ending May 19th, which we're always running about 2 weeks behind on that. But also with that actual slaughter information, we saw that they had to dial up the slaughter for the week ending May the 19th with a huge steer and heifer kill of almost 540,000 head. That would be the biggest slaughter we've had in 7 years. Now, who would have saw that coming? We've closed up a lot of plants. The plants that we do still have open are running over 90% capacity right now. And so we had kind of a short week here leading into the holiday week, and a short week this past week because of the Memorial Day holiday. But these packers are going to put the ore in the water now for the rest of June with all this demand they've got, and we're going to see some huge kills, and it's really going to help us get through this supply problem that we had. But talking about that export information, not this past week, but the week before, we saw box beef exports of 1,638 loads, and depending on how you measure it and look at it, that could be an all-time record. And you know, 147 of those loads are to our local neighbors here in North America, but almost 1,500 of them for overseas. And a lot of the liberal media try to make you think that other countries don't want to trade with us because Trump's got them all stirred up, but you sure can't tell it by our beef export sales. Let's look at your feeder cattle market. Your real-time index on Beef Market Central ended the week at 137.15, and that would have been $2.83 higher than it ended the previous week. And that goes right along with your cash feeders. Of course, your big high volume sales on Monday were closed down, but got through Tuesday kind of light. But by the time we got to Wednesday, we had our big featured auctions again, and most of your auction sales were $2 to $5 higher. We saw a recovery on your southeast shipped in calves as they kind of resumed back up and gained, you know, most of them steady to $3 higher, but some places like Mississippi as much as $10 higher than the previous week right before the holiday. But you look at some quotes that we saw late in the week last week in some auctions at Fort Scott, Kansas. Had a good sale there on Saturday. That's our best Saturday sale that we have on Beef Market Central and Cattle Market Central. But over 2,200 head of cattle. And look at these loads that were featured there at Fort Scott, Kansas. They sell strings of cattle in Fort Scott, Kansas on a Saturday, guys. And if you need some of them, make sure that you remember that. But in these loads, and most of those yearling cattle were selling $4 to $8 higher. But included in these load lots, you have one load there, 857 pound steers at 136 1/4. Now I want to go outside of reality and go up in the northern plains up to Fort Pierce, South Dakota, which are not on Cattle Market Central, but did have a roving reporter there sending me some information out of there. Over 12,000 head of cattle on offer at Fort Pierce. Had a load of fancy black steers, weighed 821 pounds, bring 158.75. The lighter end off of them weighed 743 at 168.50. And then a fancy load of stocker type steers weighing 619 pounds at 183.50. And that's what old money and free corn will do for you up in the northern plains. But reporting here from the Tracy Taylor building and on the square in downtown Maysville, Missouri. And that's a look at your week's markets. We'll talk to you next week.